Live from the Shooting from the Lip studio in Louisville, Kentucky, it's the KT Unearthly Show with your hosts, Kevin Hale and Tiffany Mack.
Now that we are about 10 minutes into the show that we haven't really started, we will go into Tiffany's monologue for the evening for the KT Unearthly Show. Social media, please subscribe to our show on iTunes or YouTube at Shooting from the Lip. Twitter at The Shooting Lip, at Tiffany Mack _ET, and at Kevin Hale 423. Like us on Facebook and Instagram, Shooting from the Lip, and the KT Unearthly Show. Live tonight via the lovely Blog Talk Radio. And tonight's guest, we have Micah Hanks, who's the host of the Gralien Report. And he's a writer, podcaster, researcher whose interests cover a variety of subjects. Areas of focus include history, science, philosophy, current events, cultural studies, technology, unexplained phenomenon, and the ways the future of mankind may be influenced by science and innovation in the coming decades. Micah is also a wonderful musician. You might have heard him with Nitrograss, and he is not only a singer, but a guitarist and a professional, God, I just forgot it, mandolin or fiddle? What are you, violinist?
Well, I used to be a violinist, but I haven't touched a violin in years, so I can't really claim that one. I'll just stick with guitar and singer.
Okay, and among those things, one of my besties, one of my best buddies. So welcome to the show. I'm sorry that we're having so many troubles. This is going to be a fun night, I promise. Hopefully, we will be able to edit out some of the problems that we had earlier due to crazy microphones and dumb computers. That's what I'm going to say it is. So how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm wonderful. So, I have a nice studio in a bunker underground, and it's kind of funny for me tonight, too, because I'm a little out of my element. I've got my mobile studio unit right here, and I'm still in Asheville where I'm based, but I'm across town from where I would normally be, because as a last-minute favor for a friend, there were two adorable little Pomeranians, and I said, yes, of course, I will house sit. And in likelihood with my mobile studio, the internet connection will be better there than it is 65 miles or so below ground where I normally broadcast from. I don't know what it is about that buffer of earth between me and the above ground, but yeah, the internet connection is just sucking wind lately. So here we are.
Well, it is. And it's been a challenge multiple times with our show, unfortunately. Let's go into conspiracy theory, shall we?
Shall we? Yes, let's shall.
So conspiracy theorists have long been convinced that UFO chasers or whistleblowers who get too close to the truth become special targets who get killed by the Secret Service or the Men in Black. So tonight we're going to take a walk on the dark side of this phenomenon by discussing the untimely deaths of some fellow ufologists. So I once read that the ultimate compliment for the Illuminati is when you are killed. It shows you are doing good work and are a great threat to them or their agenda. There's also been a lot of discussion throughout the years, including by a researcher named Otto Binder, who claimed that at least 137 UFO investigators had died under mysterious circumstances during the 1960s. So another theory is that the MIB and the aliens themselves are behind these deaths to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth or their operations. I know that this is one of your topics. It's like a little side project. There's always the mystery surrounding not only the UFO craft, not only the alien or extraterrestrials or the abductees, but also the people who are researching all of these different topics. For some reason, there have been a lot of untimely deaths. So tonight we are going to talk about Max Spears, who is one of the most recent mysterious deaths in 2016. He was found dead after texting his mother. She said, "Your boy's in trouble. If something happens to me, please investigate." So what do you think about Max Spears, who also he claims to be one of the super soldiers, which is pretty cool in my book, because not only is he a strange MyLab participant or abductee, he has this extra added bonus of being what one considers to be specially trained or used by the government in a way that is very different from our regular military branches. Tell me what you think about some of these mysterious deaths within ufology.
Well, okay, Tiffany, Max Spears has been, I think, the latest example, and he's garnered a lot of attention. Well, what is interesting about this individual is that he is cited in mostly the English tabloids because, again, I believe he himself, being a native Englishman, had been traveling when he was found dead. Some interesting observations about his alleged state at the time that he died, which we'll get into in a moment. But he had, and his passing, interestingly, had garnered the attention of the former Ministry of Defense UFO specialist Nick Pope. Now, I've met Nick Pope and interviewed him once, and we've met and talked several times, in fact. And Nick's a really nice guy, lives in the United States now, and he was quoted, I believe, probably by the Daily Mail, saying that Max Spears' death was a tragedy, and I think that this was based on a tweet that he had issued that day, but has probably been interviewed several times since then, because Nick Pope is still essentially in the UK the go-to UFO expert that a lot of the British tabloids will go to. And he had said, a tragedy though this death is, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, despite the tragedy, I can assure you, having worked for the Ministry of Defense for a number of years throughout the 1990s, looking into the UFO question, the British government and other world governments, to my knowledge, do not go out there killing UFO investigators. Max Spear, it should be pointed out that he was not just someone who was a UFO investigator. Again, we look at Max Spear's description given by the Telegraph, one of the more venerable media agencies that has reported on his death in the UK. He's described again by them within the first line as a British ufologist and conspiracy theorist. But I think that we have to break this down. Although he was interested in UFOs, he was interested in a lot of different things. And in terms of the way that the media uses that term conspiracy theorist these days, and really has probably since the 1960s in truth, conspiracy theorist is kind of a catch-all term for anyone with fairly fringe beliefs about things. Whether you be Donald Trump going around saying that the election's going to be rigged, or you're a person who said that there may actually be something to these claims of unidentified flying objects in our skies. Now, I certainly don't think that it's crazy to say that there are strange objects, aircraft, that are observed in our skies, and yet, again, you are relegated to the body of broader conspiracy theorists for calling those things a genuine anomaly and worthy of study. And Max Spears seems to have been someone, amidst his various different beliefs, who advocated that idea. But just to kind of give you an idea of some of the other things that he was interested in, he was an advocate of the idea that, of course, that there were secret cabals and organizations that were essentially pulling the proverbial puppet strings in terms of international affairs and controlling world governments thereby. He was a person who also believed in such things as the sort of sex magic rituals that were espoused in the works of the occultist Aleister Crowley. And he often talked about a sort of numerological component as it relates to Crowleyan or Crowleyite kind of perspectives on magic, which were very deeply rooted in the sexual component. Crowley, again, was not just an occultist. He was sort of a culturist. He had been a person who had experimented with a lot of illicit narcotics and drugs and things at his age. Modern early pharmacological studies, some of which had been familiar with what Crowley had written about in his own experiences, there were certain things that were based on some of Crowley's writings about the hallucinogenic properties and the other properties that could be found with some of these narcotics. So he was a mountain climber. He had a lot of things under his belt, but was best known for being this rather avant-garde occultist. And so he was very influential, I think, in terms of the kinds of things that Max Spears was looking at. He kind of had this sort of holistic view of weirdness about the broader world. And really, I think that it's okay to be a bit conspiracy-minded as long as it's measured. From what I can tell of Max Spears, he seemed to be all in on almost everything, and to a point where, frankly, it makes his death no less strange, but I wouldn't have endorsed a lot of the kind of strange theories that he did. Now, right before he died, it was reported that he was observed by individuals coughing up some sort of a strange black liquid. I don't know if this is apocryphal, if this is just anecdotal, but there are numerous reports where he had seemed to be sick and that there was some sort of a black liquid that he was coughing up, which makes the circumstance all the stranger.
I did want to talk about that because there's a few different reasons why a person would vomit black liquid. I mean, first of all, there are very common things such as ulcers or something wrong with your upper GI, drinking too much, too much heavy liquor. There's a lot of reasons why somebody could vomit up something black, but there's if he were essentially a very healthy person, there's really no reason that you should be having those issues. Now, could you possibly think about maybe the stress factor of his position or maybe the paranoia? Do you think that could have?
Yeah, it's possible. Tiffany, if I may reference this, on one of my subscriber shows for the Gralien Report, you joined us. And we had talked a little about this on the coinciding episode of the Gralien Report that week, in which we played a piece of audio from the last interview that Max Spears gave before he died. And did you happen to hear that audio soundbite?
I don't think I did.
I'll just to kind of summarize it for you. He sounded. Sure. He sounded. I don't know how I would describe this, but he did not sound collected. He sounded like he was maybe not so scatterbrained as it was distracted and perhaps uncomfortable. His breathing pattern was a little strange. Interestingly, it was intended that the interviewer on the YouTube channel where this appeared normally did video interviews with him and had said that during this circumstance that they didn't have anything set up and that they couldn't do a video. But from the strained breathing and the kind of spotty dialogue, I mean, Spears didn't really sound well.
He sounded like me tonight.
No, he sounded no, hardly. 10 to 1. You typically.
So he sounded stressed. He sounded very on edge and anxious. Correct?
Well, there was a bit of that, but there was, if you pair that with a strange kind of a measured exhaustion. I mean, there was that component too, which I would say rather than stressed or frightened or concerned or paranoid or anything like that, he sounded like he was exhausted and just not well. And I mean, the official explanation for the death was natural causes, but what's strange is that there wasn't any post-mortem, which is helped foment further questions about, well, exactly how does a guy who's, what was he, I think 38 years old maybe, how does somebody, 39, yeah, and how does somebody at that age die of natural causes? He's just told his mother, if I die, investigate. And again, it was either a strangely serendipitous in a very sad way kind of an experience, or maybe he did know something that was going on. But I got to tell you, again, after reviewing some of his interests and some of the perspectives that he espoused on different things, I would find it very hard to believe that world governments found his perspectives on these mysteries so earth-shaking and so correct, apparently, that he would be taken out. When, again, you got to think about some of the people that we interact with fairly frequently, Richard Dolan and some of the other UFO researchers who I think really do have some deep insights into how government is involved in all of this. And again, not to try and take away from, Max Spears, may he rest in peace. But again, it just, there's something about this that I don't think that we know, and I'm not convinced that it involves government.
Well, I did see an interview with him recently, and it was sort of funny because, not funny, but interesting because he stated that he was this, not only a super soldier, but he actually claimed that he did not believe in what we call death. So it's a little funny that he should die so recently after this video was posted. And he talks about the third, fourth, fifth dimensions and how you can be more transcendent and closer to God and less. I don't know. It was just sort of strange to hear him talk like that and then find out he died.
Sure.
Because it didn't sound very bizarre for him to talk this way on a regular basis, is what it seemed.
Right, yeah.
So assuming that he could die soon and tell his mother that if I die soon, please investigate. It sort of sounds like a paranoia, but sort of a knowing, sort of a psychic thing that may happen. I don't know. It was just very shocking to me to find out that he had just died after watching this video and him talking about death not being the real reality and coming back and living back on the earth in 3D and reincarnation and keep, the process going until everyone sort of ascends. I don't know.
Right, yeah. Well, I wouldn't deny that there seems to be some sort of a prescience to it. I mean, he certainly seems to be aware of things yet to come. I guess the ultimate question, though, is really what is the cause of death apart from the description of natural causes? I mean, my gut tells me that there seemed to be something about him, maybe some sort of a condition we didn't know about. This kind of thing happened to a friend of mine a few years ago. And so, I mean, I know as we're going to talk about passings in the UFO community, some of which are considered rather strange and even mysterious, and I'm sure that some of the ones that we'll examine tonight are, just to kind of tie this in with someone I knew personally who was a UFO investigator who died. I don't know if you know about this. We probably haven't talked about this in our myriad number of conversations we've had about things, Tiff, but oh
my gosh, no, who?
Yeah, his name was Mac Tonnies, and he was a researcher. He had written a book called After the Martian Apocalypse. I had just gotten to know Mac, and I didn't know him well. I mean, we'd just begun to have some email correspondences, and I wanted to interview him because I was writing this book, of course, about this crazy concept that if extraterrestrials were to visit Earth, that in likelihood they wouldn't be biological organisms as we would know it. I mean, my general premise was a kind of a thought experiment, which involves how could alien life, if they were going to travel here, get here? And there are probably two possibilities. A kind of technology that is utilized by an advanced civilization to augment their own biology so as to enable space travel without the kinds of impediments that a biological entity faces. I mean, we send our astronauts into space for a year, and their eyes are bulging. They're going through all different kinds of problems, muscular atrophy, all kinds of things are affecting them. And so we have to keep in mind that, I mean, there are negative health effects that are incurred as a result of being biological organisms that have evolved to exist on this planet. And when we go off planet for a significant amount of time, it affects us adversely. So the first question I had would be, how, if there were quote-unquote aliens traveling through space and visiting a planet like Earth, how would they get here and overcome those kinds of problems? And the only way I could perceive is they either utilize a technology that replicates an environment that is similar to the conditions on which they have evolved in terms of their planetary state, or they augment themselves, which gets into the realm of transhumanism and singularity and artificial intelligence, as we would call it here on Earth. And so this is kind of what inspired this idea in this book. And at the time, there were no other UFO researchers who were really writing about that subject, with the exception of two individuals. Our friend Richard Dolan had touched on that idea because he, being a person of multivariate interests like me, has certainly kind of approached the AI subject. And in one of his articles I'd found, he had written, even before I wrote my book, he'd said, what if alien life, when it came to Earth, wasn't alien as we would know it, but some sort of robotic form of life? I think it was about as simple as that. He didn't really go much further, but nonetheless, he absolutely broached the subject. And then Mac Tonnies was someone who was very, very, very immersed in this culture of what will we become in the eventual sense if technology indeed intercedes and intervenes in our lives in the way that it appears already to be doing. And he had a blog, which I believe is still available online, called Post-Human Blues. Again, that term post-human referring to, will the natural course of evolution, as perhaps augmented through technology produced by humans, lead to a post-human era in which we are no longer human as we know it today? And in truth, we might call it the alien life that eventually reaches Earth is post-alien. So Mac Tonnies was the only other person who was really deeply into this kind of thing, and I naturally struck up some correspondence with him. And just a very short time after it had been announced he was writing a fascinating book, which did get published, fortunately. It was called The Cryptoterrestrials. I received word that no one had heard from him in a few days, and we all began to get worried. And so someone went up to his apartment and found him dead. And Mac was just a few years older than me at the time. I think he was about 36 or 37 when he died. So, I mean, he was roughly the same age as Max Spears. And it was a weird circumstance, but there was fortunately post-mortem analysis, and according to the autopsy, it was believed that he had died of a heart condition. And talking with our colleague Nick Redfern, Nick had said, I'd talked with Mac a few weeks before he passed away to Mike, and he had privately mentioned to me that there were some discomfort issues he was experiencing and things, and so there did seem to be some sort of an inkling of an idea that there was a health issue going on. But yeah, it was another one of those cases where at first we were all kind of looking at this going, okay, wow, he just passed away. And you can imagine how it rocked my world, because here I thought I'd found this one link to this whole world of thought about UFOs and, non-earthly or non-terrestrial biology as far as my own research at that time. And then he was taken, sadly, much too soon. And I don't know that we're all the better for it, really. I mean, he was a bright mind. But yes, so that was my own connection to strange deaths in the UFO community. It was later ruled again to be something health-related, but nonetheless tragic.
Yeah. Well, we all must die in the end. Unfortunately, that's what I learned from my father.
Yeah.
He's a hunter, and that's what I learned. Now, there's a few others. I don't know if you know who Tom Reed is. He's been on our show before. His father was actually mysteriously killed. So Tom Reed was part of this family of abductees, and he was in Sheffield, Massachusetts, and it was a strange night with his mother, his brother, and his grandmother, and they were in their car, and a craft came down and took them while there were witnesses to this event. So Tom's father was a lawyer, and he was trying to get some people to actually listen and try to understand what was going on in this community at the time. But what's strange is they ended up having this big event back in, let's see when it was, I think it was 1992. They organized the United Nations Symposium on October 2nd, 1992 in New York, New York. And this is a message from Tom that I'm actually reading. He said his father was killed on the same day. He was bringing a lot of attention to the case at the time. And he sent me some documents that are really interesting. And one was from MUFON, and one was from the detective. And it's very interesting to hear that he was trying to really get this information out to people and say, hey, this is actually going on. There are aliens, there are these craft, and they are interested in us for some reason. So he says his head hit the desk at the office, and he was rushed to Yale while burning up with 103 temperature. Given his meds, his temp went down, and then he died from cardiac shock. He was found to have a deadly fungus in his blood. The CDC closed and shut down the building, and it has been locked up and closed ever since. So, he's always told me that people were trying to keep him from releasing a lot more information. Unfortunately, Tom Reed has been very, very much very forward with his information and trying to get people to acknowledge the fact that they were visited, and he's been fighting this fight for 40 years. So, gosh, his name was Howard Reed, by the way. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but it's not as rare as we would like to believe. Now, you had mentioned something about a Bill Cooper before we got on the show. Can you tell me a little bit about him?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you bring up, again, Bill Cooper, a.k.a. Milton William Cooper, same guy. William Cooper, who authored the book Behold a Pale Horse. What's funny about that, Tiffany, is more people ask me about William Cooper, and more people who I would presume are not interested, I guess, in this sort of subject matter, UFOs or the unexplained. More people I've met over the years in random conversation have brought up this book and said, the life-changing event for me, the one that really made me change the way I see the world, was this book, Behold a Pale Horse. And Bill Cooper, again, was, I guess, by definition, he was a conspiracy theorist with a strong kind of a paleoconservative kind of a constitutionalist stance on government. He was a person, he broadcast a shortwave radio program called, oh gosh, what was the show? I guess it was called Hour of the Time. And, I think I've got the theme music. I probably, can't dig it up right now, but in other circumstances, it would be interesting to reference that theme music. I think all of the old shows are archived online, and if you just look online and do a search for Hour of the Time, William Cooper, you would be able to find these. Again, these days with technology, we can buy a mixing board and a couple of microphones, and if you've got a decent internet connection and a good computer, you can get online and you can find either a radio network or you can, purchase your own streaming service, and you can broadcast from the comfort of your home for pennies on the dollar compared with what it used to cost to have to do this. But Cooper had purchased enough equipment to be able to have a small shortwave radio station in his house and did the famous out. Yeah, and he
sounds
was doing
like you, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, yeah, I do have a facility in my house, but I have to say that although I do have a satellite dish outside that I've intended to repurpose at some point, I don't actually do radio broadcast. I typically will do internet only, although there are some traditional radio stations, FM, and maybe a couple of AMs too, that will carry my show, but they typically will take the recording and rebroadcast it. Again, Bill Cooper was doing a live broadcast of this show via shortwave for years. Now, some of the things that he believed, I mean, again, he had a lot of different things, but really what's interesting is although he was a person who I think proposed that, for instance, the AIDS virus was the result of an attempt to try and engage population control and things like this, really his earliest connection to all of this sort of stuff went back to his time in the U.S. Air Force. And he had said, no, I'm sorry, I believe he'd been in the Navy. I apologize. And he had said that he had, at one point, and I think he described this somewhat in Behold a Pale Horse, he had initially said that he had been shown documents, and what this seems to suggest is that, according to his early testimonies, and he would lecture about this, he even lectured at a few MUFON events, and he became a bit of a UFO celebrity because of this. He had said that he had been shown documents that confirmed the existence of a secret governmental organization that was looking into the UFO phenomena called Majestic 12, which, again, you got to keep in mind, this has been a cornerstone of the work of the UFO researchers Stanton Friedman and Linda Moulton Howe over the years, and a few others too. Jamie Shandera and modern ufologists like our friend Richard Dolan also maintain that maybe there's more to MJ12 than meets the eye. I am of the mind, as many UFO researchers are, that it is probably less the case that MJ12 really has relevance, although obviously there are some truths to be found in some of the MJ12 documents. And just to be very, very brief, because this is important in understanding what role Cooper played in all this, the MJ12 documents became public knowledge as a result of a microfilm roll that was delivered to the filmmaker Jamie Shandera back, I guess, in the early 80s. And at that time, he had been working with a guy named Bill Moore and another gentleman by the name of course, Stanton Friedman. Stanton Friedman wrote a great book that details the entire sordid affair of their investigation into the authenticity of these documents, which were apparently some sort of government documents that were released to them, which detailed the secretive government agency called Majestic 12. The Shandera and Moore and Friedman trifecta came to the determination that these documents were real. However, a number of other UFO researchers found obvious discrepancies in the documents which show that they are actually, in likelihood, probably not authentic. I fall in line with the not authentic camp. Although I will, just as an addenda, I will add that when I was in California with Stanton Friedman, we had lunch together in Riverside, and he and I and our driver And we were sitting there having lunch, and I'd said, "Come on, Stanton, do you think they're all real?" And he says, "No, of course they're not all real." He says, "We've got to be skeptical. You're a skeptic, Micah. I'm a skeptic, but we're not debunkers." And the point is that there's some good information that we can glean from the MJ12 documents, but no, I mean, we can't really accept that they're all real. So even Stanton Friedman, I'll go on record and say he has told me he doesn't think they're all real. They're in likelihood.
Can I blow your mind real quick?
Well, sure, yeah.
So, my grandfather was in the Strategic Air Command and sort of was in the right places at the right time. I did ask before he passed away if he'd ever heard of Majestic 12, MJ12, and he looked at me and he said yes. And that shocked me because that made me think, well, it must have really existed. This group must have existed. You know, you've got Stanton Friedman who's claiming that they were, but you know, the documents, not all of them could be accurate, or some of them may have been falsified. Whatever the case may be, him saying that he was familiar with it or familiar with them was really shocking to me.
That is interesting.
What do you think about that?
Well, I'll tell you this. More recently, Colonel John B. Alexander has also said that if there was an MJ-12, it may not have had as much to do with UFOs as we thought it did, or it may not be the same group if it still exists today that was referenced in these MJ-12 documents. So, I mean, again, in large part,
but
I think
that would have been, when was that actually a group? I mean, when was that? Was that in the late 40s, the early 50s? Yeah. When were they looking at? Yes.
The official story about MJ-12 would have been that immediately following probably the famous Roswell crash, that Vannevar Bush.
So like 49 through thereafter, maybe a decade after.
48, 49, yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. And Vannevar Bush had been in charge. Now, what's interesting is that there was this anecdotal report that had been filed, and this turned up in the Canadian, I guess it would have been the Canadian National Archives. And Stanton actually had a copy of this, and Grant Cameron and other researchers have referenced this document. But there was the Wilbert B. Smith document, which, again, many people say, oh, wow, this proves that MJ-12 existed. But you got to keep in mind, Wilbert Smith had been independently investigating UFOs, went to Washington, spoke to the gentleman at the Canadian embassy there, and that fellow told him that high-level officials were telling him that Vannevar Bush and a group of other scientists had been appointed to try and study the UFO subject, and that they considered it the highest priority, which some suggest may have been the origin of, if they were phony documents, may have been the origin of the legend of the MJ-12 in itself. Now, again, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but that's really kind of a concise history of the pros and the cons for and against MJ-12. How Bill Cooper fits into this, though, is that he claimed, I believe, at no less than Pearl Harbor, that he had been shown documents that referenced MJ-12, and he really was all in on that for a long time and went around lecturing on the UFO subject for a number of years. And then after a few years, Cooper, and this is kind of interesting, after a number of years, he did an about-face and began to really question things. And he'd even taken groups out, and they'd been trying to film lights over Area 51 and things like this out in the desert. And beyond a certain point, Cooper starts saying, you know, best I can tell, I've been hoodwinked. I've been duped. He said, this MJ-12 stuff, I see that there's no evidence that any of it's legitimate. I think my government lied to me and tried to use me as an individual to spread bad information. And frankly, I think that all of the UFO phenomena can be essentially explained through our own top secret aviation technologies that our and other governments are employing. So he did this complete about face, which interestingly, I mean, a lot of, modern UFO, well, maybe not a lot, but I mean, I know I've certainly kind of gone more down that road myself in looking at, could there be a misinformation angle utilized by government in order to dissuade the public from thinking that there is technology of our own that's being developed that's capable of this sort of thing? Cooper kind of went down that road later in life and said there's nothing to be seen here in terms of this alien reality, and I was lied to, and worse, I was even misled enough to where I went out there talking about this stuff as though it were fact myself. So it's kind of interesting because he was one of the few people who I think may have been exploited for purpose of government misinformation campaigns, who kind of snapped out of it and said, I'm not gonna do this anymore. Cooper's death, though, makes him a very controversial individual. He had gotten further and further away from ufology and was more kind of associated with that right-wing kind of, again, paleoconservative anti-government militia movement there in the mid to late 1990s. He began to believe that he was, a target of sorts, that he was kind of, being targeted by, I guess, then President Bill Clinton and all this different stuff. He thought the IRS was after him. And in July of 1998, I think he was formally charged with evading, paying taxes. And so there was an arrest warrant issued, and there was a strange incident that took place on his property where they knew that they had to get him out of his house, and I think that the intention had been to try and arrest him. He apparently comes out of his house, and there had been some police officers that had been parked on his property blasting loud music, and he thought that there were kids. So he goes down there. Okay. Now, keep in mind, in 2000, I think he had been named a quote-unquote, major fugitive by the U.S. Marshals. And in 2001, they go out there to try and arrest him at his home in Arizona. There is a shootout that occurs, for lack of a better term. There's an officer that is killed in this exchange, and yes, William Cooper was shot also, and he was killed. So, I mean, it was a very unfortunate and probably unnecessary incident that occurred. Many would say that, that he was a target of government. Others would say that this was a right-wing nut job and that the police had gone out there to arrest the guy, and that he fought back, and it resulted in the death of an officer and his death. So we may never know the true circumstances that really unfolded that night, but he was certainly a very controversial character, and yes, a person who had some very different views about UFOs and ended up dying mysteriously himself.
It makes you wonder, how much are you really allowed to relay to the public about what you know or what you think you know? I know that we talk about Big Brother a lot and how our phones may be tapped. Now that we have cell phones, they're following us everywhere. Everywhere we have our cell phone, and we take them everywhere. We talk about being able to be watched through our computers, through the video camera on your computer, or have people listening to and watching what you're scrolling through on your internet. And, it's a fact that there are people doing this. It's a fact that they do watch what you're, typing into your computer. You have a list of these special words that you're not allowed to use unless you want to be on a watch list. What do you think about the watch list? Do you think that's a bunch of BS, or do you think it's actually legitimate?
No, of course it's legitimate. I'm sure I'm probably on a couple of them, and not for any kind of inflammatory or threatening kind of language. I mean, I'm very careful about what I say online, but I mean, you got to keep in mind.
Just research.
Well, see, I worked in radio for a number of years, and when I worked in radio, I would often go on I was a producer of a progressive liberal talk radio show for a short time, but I would occasionally sit in as a producer / co-host on a libertarian conservative show, which was the most listened to drive time radio show in our region at that time. It was called Take a Stand. It was hosted by a man named Matt Matan, who's still a good friend of mine, still lives in this region. And so engaging in public political commentary, and in a town like Asheville, we had the progressive liberal hosts, but I would typically come on with a more libertarian kind of but then again, I guess, the co-host Leslie, progressive though she called herself, she absolutely had a kind of Bernie Sanders-esque libertarian streak herself. And so we'd have very interesting conversations. And at that time, one of the hot questions was about Obamacare. And I mean, I remember I went on the air one day and gave this complete breakdown of why I said economically, I didn't think that the Affordable Care Act would become a functional healthcare system in America. I thought that it was going to have innate flaws and that it was going to become a real problematic situation. And I'm not trying to take this down a skewed political path. Everybody knows who follows my work that I do a podcast called Middle Theory, which is unabashedly and uncompromisingly centrist. So, but, again, during this election cycle that we've seen, both sides of the fence, both candidates currently in the 2016 election are addressing the problems that we face now with the Affordable Care Act. So I feel somewhat vindicated from a nonpartisan stance on that. Now, the reason I bring this up is because at the time that I went on the radio and I would talk about this, people would talk to me. And in fact, I think that there'd been a state legislature here in North Carolina, legislator rather, that came up and he visited and he said, Mr. Hanks, when you talk like that, he said, correct though you may be in your economic breakdown, the fact that you are addressing this at a time of such political volatility, you need to recognize that in likelihood this will probably get you on somebody's radar, and they will be watching you for the mere mention of the following terms. And he lists a number of things, health care, whatever. And it was interesting because he'd said that, if you are a public commentator in this sphere, that in likelihood, with the kind of surveillance that's occurring in a post 9/11 world, I mean, people who, innocuous though they may feel or seem in their commentary that they provide, if they're in a position where they are providing that commentary and many people can hear them and they're engaging in sometimes controversial political dialogue, in likelihood, they'll be added to a watch list. That doesn't necessarily mean, that you're going to be first in line at the FEMA prison camps or something like that, all kidding aside, I mean, again, I think it's just a reality today that there are a number of different methods of screening and surveillance that occur. And that is the reality of the world in which we live. I'm not really comfortable with it, but I think I've got a practical and realistic sense that, yeah, it's not BS. I mean, the sort of surveillance you're describing there, and not just watch lists, but some of the other things that you talked about, video surveillance via, cameras equipped on smartphones and on laptop computers, audio surveillance through monitoring phone calls, all kinds of things. I mean, this is absolutely, yes, Orwellian, but also a reality of the everyday.
Well, since we're talking about that, what do you think the best way to communicate would be without being watched? Are we going back to like the calligraphy on these beautiful printed handmade paper? Or are we going to have to write letters again and just hope that they actually get to the actual person that you're sending them to without being opened?
If a group of individuals could enter a room together and write the messages and pass them back and forth across a table, and it was a very, very well controlled environment, and they knew that there were no cameras, that might be effective. The thing is I think that trying to send something through the mail would be equally susceptible to surveillance. In truth, I won't name him now, but I've got a friend who's been involved in various different kind of research for a number of years, and he said that for a short period, he had said that he began to get really paranoid and said that he believed that his landline phone had been tapped. In addition to the landline phone being tapped, so he believed, he said it became evident, not just possible, but he said it was apparent that, his mail, he would receive packages from colleagues.
They were steamed open, I bet. Were they steamed open, the letters?
Yeah, they had been, or opened in some other way. He said it was obvious that they'd been opened and resealed. Yeah, so, and he said, call me paranoid, but he said it was obvious that there was something going on. Someone had been watching me. I, on 2 occasions myself, Tiffany, have had phone calls with people. Funny enough, one of those conversations was about, of all silly things, it was about the Mothman legend, the Mothman thing about Point Pleasant, West Virginia, that John Keel had written a great book about, and I recommend that book. It's a very entertaining read. We've been talking about Mothman, and we got disconnected, and this individual and I on several occasions had become disconnected on landline phone conversations like this, but we were talking about Mothman this day, and when we became disconnected, I hit redial to reconnect, and I hear him dialing, and I say, hey, I'm here. And he starts talking, and as we realized we're reconnected, we could hear very faintly in the background was a busy signal, as though there had been a third line that had been connected to and he says, shh, listen. We both heard it. And I said, are you on landline? He said, yeah, I'm on landline. I said, so am I. We were both on landlines. I was in my office at the time, which was not in my home, and he was on his landline at his home. And we both had this dial tone in the background that we could hear as though a third party had been monitoring, and when the call was disconnected, theirs didn't reconnect with the conversation, ours did, and we could hear them. And, talk about strange, but things like this happen. They absolutely do.
Well, I will tell you that, during the 90s, our family was under surveillance by the FBI, and nothing bad had to do with my dad's business. Everything's cool. But we did have our phone. I know. We did have our phone tapped. We did have mail opened, steamed open. We had cars tailing us. I was followed to school every day and followed wherever they decided to follow us. And it was very, very scary. But what's funny is when I worked for the military over in Greece, I had the same thing happen. I ended up having, my phone was tapped. Obviously, it was a government phone anyway, but they can do whatever they want with it. But every time I talked about anything that was a little controversial or had to do with security or had to do with any of the flights coming in or going out or any of the crews coming in or out or anybody that was staying with me, if I said too much or started to head down that road, they would cut me off. They would end the call, dead air. I would not be able to make a call for another 5-10 minutes. And, this was during wartime, but it was amazing to see because I knew what was going on because I had that previous experience. And, just making phone calls home was a challenge because I was in a situation where I couldn't talk about a lot of things that was going on.
Yeah.
Very strange, but definitely, I agree. We're definitely being monitored at all times.
Well,
so hello out there.
Yeah, well, I was talking with my mother the other night about probably the recent WikiLeaks with regard to John Podesta, and more specifically how my brother Caleb's former employer, Tom DeLong, showed up in these WikiLeaks. And while I was on the phone with my mom, we were talking about this, and she says, wait, hold on, Tom was in there? And we don't know Tom very well, but I've never spoken with him at all, but my brother Caleb has spoken with him at least once at length on the telephone, and then they had numerous email exchanges during a period where Caleb worked for Tom's company, To the Stars Media. And Caleb had heard that Tom, of course, was getting more involved in UFO stuff. He had not heard that Tom had showed up in some of the recently released WikiLeaks emails in correspondence with Clinton campaign manager John Podesta. And I called Caleb after I spoke to my mom, and I joked with both my mother and Caleb while we were on the phone the other night that in likelihood, and I think I may have spoken to you later that night too about this, but I told them both, I said, in likelihood, just be aware that if we talk about Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, Tom DeLong, and anybody who he's been allegedly in contact with at the U.S. Air Force, then probably this would be the kind of thing that somebody would listen to. But then again, I don't know that. I think that a lot of conversations are probably monitored, whether or not by a live individual. I'm not certain what all of the various technologies that are utilized actually are. I think that there are probably many that are far more advanced than we would expect. The Raptor program out there in Utah, or any number of other kind of surveillance technologies probably utilize very high, truly highly advanced algorithms to engage recording via automated systems. And probably not all that is recorded or stored or monitored is of interest, but it nonetheless is recorded in the age-old tradition of better safe than sorry. Some analysts and security experts maintain that all information basically that is transferred or used or for communication purposes digitally is monitored. Now, really, I want to say, just coming back to your question, what's the best way? Should we go back to calligraphy pens and things? I love calligraphy, and I took a few calligraphy classes when I was younger. So I don't do it like my mother. My mother's great with calligraphy, and I kind of dabble, but
it's a lost art.
Well, so is cursive anymore,
Oh,
but
wow. Or this is what my mom likes to do. She's studying shorthand because she doesn't like people understanding her notes, namely her husband.
Well, but that's something. There's something to be said, and one of the two ways I would say that maybe proper communication could be carried out would be first, I would say simply that just an encrypted communication system. There are a lot of, I think, unseen.is, which is an Icelandic email service provider. They offer encrypted communication systems, and that would be one of the first ways I would recommend if people really want their communications not to be monitored. Utilize an encrypted communication system. But I think
is
if you want to
easily accessible for the average person, though?
It is actually, yeah. There are even apps. There are even smartphone apps, and it's something that has become a bit of a point of contention among various technology firms and companies. The Firefox browser a while back, I utilize all the browsers on my computer because I'm a web developer, and so I utilize different browsers for different things, and some are better at certain functions than others. And I'd logged into my Firefox browser for the first time in several weeks, and there was this little pop-up thing that instead of saying update to the latest version of Firefox, it said, we would like to update you on internet privacy. Take time to take this tour. And I was interested in why they were offering something like that. And so I took the little tour, and it was talking about, we want to educate Firefox users on internet privacy. Did you know that, and they give you a list of different apps and programs and services that you can use freely for encrypted communication. They talk about surveillance and the reality of surveillance today. I mean, Firefox did this, which just goes to show, again, where the company's stance must be on the ever-present, if not threat, just the reality. I don't think it's threatening overtly, but I mean, there is a reality that if you are going to communicate online, in likelihood, you will be prone to being watched, surveilled, monitored, whatever. That is just the reality of today.
Right. Yeah. It's terrifying, but true, unfortunately. So let's continue on. And the other guy that has always interested me is Philip Schneider. And I think probably a lot of people have seen the video of him discussing the Dulce Wars. What kind of information do you have on Phil Schneider?
Well, Schneider was a strange kind of a fellow, really. I think again he was born at a Navy hospital, and he had actually, I think, gone on, of course, to work in government himself. He claimed to be an ex-government structural engineer. I think that was his actual background that he said that he had, and he said that basically what he did as a structural engineer was that he had actually worked to build underground bases, essentially, for government, which led him to the precarious circumstance in which his wildest stories seemed to have taken place. Now, he said that in 1979, apparently he had been kind of descending down into a tunnel, and I believe that this would have actually taken place at the alleged underground base there at Dulce. And what he said had happened was that he was rappelling, I guess, down into this. And there's video that you can see in this. I'm just recalling all this from memory, by the way. But as he's rappelling into this corridor, that he comes down into this area and everything, and he is met with these grays. He says what look like aliens, and they actually opened fire. And he had allegedly lost fingers, and also.
Well, it wasn't fire. They had like a laser type thing that just sliced through his body and cut his fingers off. And but that to me just, screams, what the hell? Because first of all, the guy doesn't even believe in aliens to begin with, and then is faced with them as he descends down into this tunnel. But oh my God, can you imagine?
Well, it was a strange circumstance, and kind of like the Max Spears thing. His ex-wife, Cynthia Dreyer, believed that he had been killed. She believed that he'd been essentially assassinated because of, the information that he revealed and his involvement with this project, and the fact that he had seen and experienced these things with aliens. So, his story is definitely strange. I don't really know what to make of Phil Schneider, but a lot of people have asked me questions about him over the years. Again, he claims that he was a structural engineer. I think at one time he'd been employed by the Morrison Knudsen company, and that he had been tasked with, the actual construction of some of these underground bases, which is what put him directly face to face, he claims, with these alien beings. Now, there have been a lot of legends about this, especially the Dulce underground base. And I just want to say that, there are a lot of underground facilities. There really are. In likelihood, some of the most famous conspiratorial installations in the world, including the Groom Lake facility, otherwise known as Area 51, in likelihood, has probably a vast underground complex that probably recedes back into the hill against which the primary base is set. So I don't think that it's unusual to suppose that there are underground facilities. We go all the way back to the Second World War. The Nazis had underground missile factories, like the Mittelbrau missile facility that they had, which I think had at the very least seven levels below ground. It was disguised above ground as like a little farmhouse way out in the country. And so they'd certainly utilized a variety of different underground facilities during the Second World War. Dr. Joseph Farrell talks about this pretty extensively in some of his written works. And, again, I think that the best way to hide something is either to put it right out in plain sight or to utilize some sort of an underground component, which is fascinating to me for a number of different reasons that range well beyond Phil Schneider and just the UFO conspiracy mythos. To me, I find the whole underground component very, very interesting, because going way back to the beginning of ufology, and there were some unexplained deaths and some weird circumstances, some threatening kind of things that had happened right around that time too. But going back to the middle 1940s, even predating the modern UFO era, and really even the genesis of the terminology that we use, flying saucer, to this day, there was this fella, Richard Sharp Shaver, and this is pretty well known, already. So, what I'm talking about here, a lot of well-versed ufologists out there in the audience will already know, but Richard Sharp Shaver had been this fellow who had been an automotive worker, I think, up in Detroit, and he'd claimed that he'd gotten these weird communications from these beings from underground, but he'd also variously described that he'd been kidnapped and taken underground by these people and had actually been to their realm. He believed that there was this sort of I don't know if you'd call it a proto-human civilization, but it was some sort of a civilization of what were called Deros, which was sort of a short name for detrimental robots. These were the evil counterpart to the Teros, which were the good people. And they were two kind of factions of a long-lost civilization that existed underground. And he had submitted a document to Amazing Stories magazine, which was edited at the time by Ray Palmer. And Ray Palmer had found this in the slush pile. Back in the old days, the slush pile was essentially just kind of a bunch of, random submissions and things that the magazines would receive. And he sees this great big long thing that was titled A Warning to Future Humankind. And he says, what's this? And they said, it's just something, some crazy guy sent. So Ray Palmer looks it through, and he finds it very interesting. He makes some severe edits, but keeps the gist of the story. And he renames the document, I Remember Lemuria, and publishes it in Amazing Stories magazine. I think that was published in 1945 or 6. The rest is history. This became the first installment of what was known over the next several months and even years to follow as the Shaver Mystery. And it was based on the alleged recollections of this guy, Richard Sharp Shaver, who said that there were these beings underground. And Ray Palmer, when he left Amazing Stories, which was published by Ziff Davis Publishing, he was still under contract with them, so he couldn't use his own name, but under a pseudonym, he, in 1948, starts a brand new magazine because he became convinced that this Shaver mystery stuff was the answer to what these flying saucers were. He said, I don't think Shaver was crazy. I think that this guy was legit, and that whatever it was, whoever these people underground were, they were the ones behind these flying saucers. And he starts a brand new magazine in 1948 under a pseudonym with a business partner, and that magazine was called Fate Magazine. And that was the first original publication in the United States, or really anywhere, that was devoted to the study of the UFO phenomena. And that's kind of how that began. But it's funny because, that underground component, somewhat mirrored in the underground alien base mythos and the stories of Phil Schneider and people like that, it's kind of got this interesting cultural counterpart that goes way back to the 1940s and the Shaver mystery stuff.
I like the way you just discussed Fate magazine, as you are very much involved, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Fate is still in publication somehow after all these years.
It is. I've read a few articles from different Fate magazines, and I definitely think that there are some good stories. I think that some of them are sort of fluff and entertaining, but but they are a lot of fun to read, and there's some pretty good stuff, especially the ones that you write.
Well, what's funny is, full disclosure here, I'm a columnist for the magazine now, and there have been a lot of different people. A lot of people have written columns, but right now I'm the only columnist in that magazine, and Phyllis, the publisher, is moving down here where I live to Asheville, North Carolina, and so in the coming years, I hope to be more involved in Fate. But again, full disclosure, I feel like our perspective on these kinds of subjects have changed so much in the last few years, and what Fate began is, it would have to be something different if it's really going to continue into the future. We since the beginning of the ufological era, or really just, since the end of the Second World War and all the technological innovation and the almost greater than exponential growth of technology since that time, we as team civilization, we might call it, we've got a whole new set of questions and a whole new set of pursuits. Look at what's really on everybody's mind right now. Mars, getting there, possibly colonizing Mars, maybe even colonizing other locations out there. We've got a lot of different objectives and aims with not just space, but also with other technological applications. And what we're really working on today with self-driving cars may eventually lead to the eventual formation of and the institution of intelligence systems that are on par with or greater than human intelligence, artificial intelligence. These things are all right around the corner. I think that this needs to be, at one time in the 1940s, we saw UFOs as being that. I'm not saying UFOs aren't something that are worthy of study any longer. I'm merely saying that was kind of the great mystery at that time, something that was a few steps ahead of us and yet pleasantly out of reach. And now we have a whole new set of things that are doing that for us today. And again, I think naturally as time goes on and we learn more, we have to kind of shift our focus to what is that thing that's right around the corner. UFOs to an extent are still that, but there's a lot to this world that we don't understand,
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm right on board with this whole self-driving car. I swear, I would like to half the time, how many people are out there who have to drive an hour to work every day? Think about that hour as being a nice little rest time or a time to catch up on your reading. Or, there's a lot of people who actually get to drive the subways or, the trains. We don't get to do that here in the Midwest because we don't have that. So I am all about that. Bring it on.
Yeah, but, I agree. When I go up to the city and we have to take public transit, I was thinking about, I went up to visit a friend and I got on the train there at Grand Central Station and had about an hour and a half train ride. And I was thinking, wow, this is so novel. I mean, I can sit in a chair and look out the window and read books and things.
Nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty pleasant.
It's not something I'm
Except
used
for
to.
the crazy lady that sits next to you who's like shaking and speaking in tongues and asking you if you want to blow your nose in her tissue. I don't know.
Yeah. I was fortunate because on my train ride there was a very attractive young lady sitting just across from me, and she was absolutely just glued. I mean, her eyes never left her phone. Yeah, you thought she was going to say me, huh? No.
Yeah.
No. She like most young millennials these days. I mean, she was on her phone the entire time. And I'm thinking, there's a window right next to you, this beautiful countryside, so much to see, confined to a 2-inch by 2-inch space on the screen in front of you, whatever.
I know. All right. So what do you think about Edward Snowden and his sort of whistleblower attitude? What do you think about the information that he's come forward with? Do you believe that he's actually pretty damn accurate, or do you think it's a front for more disinformation?
There's some people that speculate that Edward Snowden is himself an intelligence agent. I don't think that that's the most probable scenario. I think that in likelihood he is, again, a person who felt that the information that he had and the information that he intended to and eventually did release was in the best interest of the people. Then that's speaking from the perspective of an American citizen looking at a person who's another American citizen who nonetheless revealed data about individuals that compromised their clearances and, frankly, compromised their covers and may have led to certain deaths as well. So there's good and there's bad with Edward Snowden. I do believe that he is probably accurate in what he says about what's going on, but the way that he went about the release, although he may have felt that this was in a Machiavellian kind of a sense, the means to justify the ends, there was the negative as well as the positive that was incurred. Then outside of U.S. citizens who engage themselves in such things, we can hardly have this conversation without the mention of someone like Julian Assange, who is, I think, a bit more chaotic in his presentation than Edward Snowden, but nonetheless, cards perhaps of the same deck. And I find Julian Assange interesting in the same way, but the important thing I think that we should bring up with these two people, if I may evoke a bit of, I think, healthy skepticism here, we talk about people who, quote unquote, the ubiquitous they in the government kill because they knew too much about UFOs or this or that or whatever. And yet we've got people like Edward Snowden and we've got people like Julian Assange, and even though they are being protected at embassies and they've, sought, not exile so much as, I guess, asylum being the proper term, Edward Snowden seeking asylum in Russia, and of course at the embassy there in London, Julian Assange, these people, we know where they are, and yet the quote-unquote government, the ubiquitous they, whoever they are, who are tasked with utilizing the government's secret mind bullets to kill people when they say too much. We can't kill Assange and we can't kill Snowden, but these UFO researchers can be just picked off like it's nothing. I mean, to me, there's a logical fallacy that arises from that argument. I mean, you'd think that if anybody were going to be enemy number one and would become a target for these kind of things, Assange and Snowden would have been long gone already, and yet they're still alive. So when it comes to someone like Max Spear or some of these other strange UFO deaths, I have to ask, if we really had that kind of technology, aren't there people who would be greater concerns, who would be the focuses of such technology? And if that's not the case, I don't know, but it's just kind of a funny thing to me. So it's interesting that you bring up Snowden, because I think that really, with regard to our broader conversation tonight, that's the first question I would ask. How are those guys still alive if there's really some secret cabal that's going out there trying to assassinate people because of knowing too much?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a possibility, though. I don't know. It's terrifying to think when it comes to your name being on a list saying you were a participant, what do you do? You can't really do anything about it. They're just there. Your name's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. With regard to, I don't know if you want to go in this direction, but I was going to mention, though, historically, there are a lot of different people who have been involved in strange deaths and things as it does relate to UFOs. And I don't think that they necessarily, there are a lot of different historical circumstances that seem to involve people who have either been involved in bizarre communications or circumstances, as we'll see in this first case that I intend to mention here, or individuals who may have actually been killed under strange circumstances who happen to be UFO researchers. Now, one of the first people that comes to mind here is Albert Bender. And Bender had claimed to have had a lot of different supernatural encounters and things like that, but what's probably most important about him is that back in 1952, he founded what was called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And this was really, I think, for its time, if not the biggest, it may have actually been the first, the original like UFO mailing group / UFO committee group club, kind of like the modern MUFON. And Bender had claimed that, I think he founded that group in 52 probably, and that the following year at some point he was approached by 3 people. And they weren't maybe the classic MIB, but this seems to be sort of a point of origin for the legend of the Men in Black. He said that there were 3 men that visited him at his house. And I'll mention, by the way, that in the second film, Men in Black with Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, that this is kind of with the actor with the comedian David Cross. There's a character where he's living up in his mom's attic and everything, and so Albert Bender is sort of parodied through David Cross's character in that film. So when you see Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones go up there to talk to him, that's what they're playing off of, this guy who gets visited by Men in Black. The true story was he said that they visited him and that these Men in Black back in 1953 communicated with him using telepathic communication. And he said that they had given him some sort of a disc, a metallic-looking disc with information on it, and he felt like he was transported at one point, and that these individuals gave him information about UFOs, and shortly thereafter, Bender closed down the entire Flying Saucer Bureau and said that he had come to awareness of the truth of the UFO mystery, and that, well, basically that because of this, he could no longer continue to talk about this. So many years later, this experience that Bender had was written about in this book that was written by a gentleman by the name of Gray Barker, a very controversial character. And the book was called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Now, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers would have been written probably like in, the 1960s. And yet, again, it was already kind of inferring that there were deaths and strange circumstances and threats and things being associated with those who talked about the UFO subject. So that's what's, I think, important in looking at the lineage of people who may have been accosted or killed even in relation to UFO stuff, is that there's this book that came out that Gray Barker wrote, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which really was kind of a pivotal moment in that conspiratorial line of thinking, if you want to look at it like that. And again, there are different interpretations of what Albert Bender claimed that these men were. Did they work with the government? He said that they communicated telepathically, so it seemed to be inferred that they were actually aliens themselves or something along those lines. And it's kind of funny because, although he wasn't necessarily someone who was killed in relation to UFO mysteries, he was certainly someone who many inferred over the years had been threatened by it. Now, in terms of actual deaths, one of the earliest deaths associated with the UFO that I can think of personally involves Thomas Mantell. And he was a captain with the Kentucky Air National Guard. So, Tiffany, right there in your home state.
That's what my uncle is in. I know, back to me.
Well, and it's funny because this was an early case. You got to keep in mind that the Roswell incident took place on, I guess it was in July. Was it July 4th or 5th, I guess, in 1947. The Mantell incident took place the following January. I think it was January 7th, 1948. And the story goes that there was a large UFO and that a group of pilots were scrambled, and Mantell ascended to an unsafe altitude and probably suffered something akin to like hypoxia, where essentially what that describes is when you fly to if you were a pilot in an unpressurized cabin like an early aircraft like this, and you fly to that altitude, the oxygen becomes so thin that you actually pass out, and then so he crashes to the ground. That is in likelihood what happened to Mantell. And despite the fact that he knew he was flying to an unsafe altitude, he was convinced that he had to go after this aircraft. But what's funny about this is that despite UFO researchers for decades talking about the flying saucer that Mantell had chased way back in like 1956, and this is an interesting thing in its own, because Edward Ruppelt, had been the first head of the U.S. Air Force flying, or the Flying Saucer Research Group Project Blue Book. Ruppelt had been the very one in his 1956 edition of his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. He coined that term, unidentified flying object, and he had said Mantell was probably chasing a large skyhook balloon. And he had said, and he wrote about this in his book, he said in 1948 it was a top secret project that Mantell would not have known about. But of course, by the time
so
that
he
wrote
was
his book,
chasing a balloon.
What he said was,
a pilot who knows what's in the air, and he's chasing a balloon.
He knows what's in the air, but he would not have known about the skyhook balloon because at the time that was a secret project. So Edward Ruppelt, who was Ruppelt coined the term unidentified flying object, and in his book he said it's clear to me, and he gives a great, he gives a very good breakdown for why he thought that the object that Mantell was after was a balloon, in fact. And that book, the initial edition, there was a second edition that was released a couple of years later, but the first edition of the book by Ruppelt gave a very fair and maybe one of the very best analyses, even to date, although it was written in the 50s, about the modern UFO phenomena. I mean, the U.S. Air Force's investigation into it, a lot of scientific investigation. It's a really great book, and if you've never read it, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Edward Ruppelt, I mean, it's one of the best books in the entire history of UFOs, one of the best books on that subject. Despite the really good breakdown that I think he gives for what Mantell was chasing, people have for years written about Mantell chased a UFO and died under mysterious circumstances when his plane crashed afterward, But what's funny is that Ruppelt himself died when he was only once again, I think he was in his 30s, 36, 37. So it's kind of scary that all these UFO researchers, pass away in their late 30s. God, what's going to happen to us when we get to our late 30s, Tiff?
I'm there.
Oh no! Oh God!
Yeah. I've got one more year, and then I catch up with Max.
Well, oh God! Well, I'm not far behind you, so this is getting concerning because Ruppelt. Let's see, I gotta do the math here. He was died in 1960. I gotta remember when he was born, but anyway, long story short, I mean, he was definitely in his 30s when he passed away. So. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, there's a weird history of these sorts of things, although I could argue that Mantell hadn't died under mysterious circumstances. Ruppelt was way too young when he passed away, so it's kind of a strange circumstance there.
So I have a question that's come through, and the question is, so what happens when you're not only a ufologist but an experiencer or an abductee? I wonder if the risk ends up going up in comparison to the other deaths that have occurred.
Well, what's funny is I don't know of a single alleged abductee who has been a person who has met an untimely death. Most of the prominent abductees, those who claim to have had these experiences, are still with us. Whitley Strieber, Travis Walton, a number of others. And there are plenty of abductees I know who are not famous abductees, but who are, experiencers who I've met over the years who have become very good. Funny enough, although I'm much more kind of a nuts and bolts kind of historical UFO researcher, as you probably very well know, Tiffany, I'm quite good friends with a lot of people who are experiencers who claim to have had their own experiences, and I've interviewed and spent a lot of time with people in that area of the community. I can't think of a single one, to my knowledge at least, who has met an untimely death. So I guess my initial response would be that maybe they're, for some reason, less susceptible to the kind of death that those who are doing the more kind of ground-based nuts and bolts research would be.
Yes, and here's another question or another comment. Maybe they are protected from these untimely deaths.
Perhaps so. Perhaps so. I mean, who really knows? Although, again, I'm still on the fence. I don't think the alien contact circumstance is so much something that I debate whether it exists. I again know a lot of people who have had these experiences. My question is, I just don't know exactly what that experience is. I don't doubt that it happens. When you talk with someone like Travis Walton, for instance, and he describes this experience where initially these strange-looking beings come into the room, but then thereafter, throughout the duration of his experience, he says they basically look like people.
Right.
When you talk with Whitley Strieber, and he says, I never said that these things were aliens, and he's not saying that they weren't. He's merely saying, I don't know what they were, but he said, and he is in Communion. I'll tell everybody, to go and read that book. He says in that book that, these could have been time travelers. These could have been, any number of different things. Interdimensional travelers. He kind of runs the gamut. The thing is that these sorts of experiences, who knows? How can we tell? Our best approximation very well may be that these are alien beings, but we may not have a clear enough understanding. Again, I'll evoke Clarke's third law, which everybody since time, well, at least since he first evoked it, has brought to the table, which is simply this, that, any sufficiently advanced technology as seen by a lesser advanced technology will be perceived as magic. And the magic of the UFO experience very well may be something that is a technology that is so great beyond ours that we have very little concept of really what it entails. We have a few guesses, but those are entirely anthropomorphized through human perception. We may be dealing with something so different from what we perceive based on our own human expectations that it completely, the truth of it, whatever it is, completely evades us.
Well, Kevin was on the line. He wanted to join us, and now he said, never mind.
Oh, no.
Hold on.
Oh,
Oh, no. Hold on one second. Kevin Hale.
What up, T-Mac?
How you doing there, buddy? We've got Micah on tonight. He's been fabulous, just killing it. And we were wondering when you were going to show up.
I've actually been in queue for like 17 or 18 minutes listening to the good stuff. Micah, thanks for coming on. What's up, brother?
Oh, man, it's good to hear your voice, Kevin. Although good stuff, I don't know. It's okay, man. You can just go ahead and say he's been rambling again, hadn't he?
No, you. I like how Tiffany can go, I've got to take care of my child, and Micah just keeps the beat going. I love it.
That should have been behind the scenes, but
I know that's what
Micah's not checking out the messenger.
Exactly. You would. That's when, if I was there, you would have said, Kevin, I got to go. Keep going.
I know. But, I know. I miss my Kevin tonight.
I know.
Can we get a hell yeah?
Hell yeah.
There he is.
Two questions for you. And again, Micah, thanks so much for hanging with Tiffany tonight and doing our show. Good stuff. You touched on Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, which I'm a huge fan of Julian. Why hasn't he played the UFO card? Why hasn't he come out? Because that is one of the, obviously, in our day and age, that is one of the things that people really want to know. And I guess what, as a believer, as someone who feels and thinks that, that there is life outside of the Earth, our planet, and that they've been here and all this stuff, if that's the case, why wouldn't Assange have already, shared that info with us?
That's a good question. What's interesting is in this latest WikiLeaks, which, Tiff and I talked about a little bit, there's a lot of information as it relates to UFOs that has come about, but I think, like you're kind of getting at there, Kevin, there's nothing that's explicitly aimed at the UFO subject. It seems to me that Assange doesn't seem to have any kind of overt interest in that. If he's ever said otherwise, and if either of you guys know about that, by all means interrupt and let me know, because I've never gotten the impression that he's overtly interested in it. But within this latest batch of WikiLeaks, there are a lot of emails to John Podesta that show that there is an interest in UFOs held by government and a number of other individuals. For example, there were people who were not, it wasn't actually Edgar Mitchell himself, but there were people who were representative of Edgar Mitchell. I got to interview him a number of years ago, participate in an interview with him. I wasn't the only person interviewing him, but he was the sixth man to walk on the moon. He founded, after he was an astronaut with NASA, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And Edgar Mitchell was a longtime advocate of the idea that alien life did exist and that, yes, they had been to Earth. There were different kinds of aliens, not just one that were coming here. I mean, he really had, again, what he had said to me probably way back in 2005 or 6 during an interview was that he had heard numerous times from the upper echelons of government that, yes, Earth has been visited and that, yes, we've been a recipient of visits by intelligent life. That was his belief. And again, this coming from a NASA astronaut who'd walked on the moon. And he was maybe the only NASA Apollo-era astronaut who regularly stated such belief, although it's been alluded to at least by a few others over the years. So someone from his foundation contacted John Podesta, the current head of the Clinton campaign, and there are emails in the latest WikiLeaks dump that show this. And then, of course, what's even more interesting to me is Tom DeLonge of Blink-182, formerly of Blink-182. He had emailed John Podesta as the new WikiLeaks emails show. And a lot of people have kind of trivialized that, but what's really interesting is that in those emails, he specifically cites a gentleman by the name of, Dr. McCasland, and he says that this guy had headed the scientific department at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Well, this obviously would be Major William Neil McCasland. And yes, he's one of the highest-ranking science officers with the U.S. Air Force, and yes, had been stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And in the emails to Podesta, he actually says that, DeLonge does, that this was a very important man and the man who had actually put together his advisory committee for the UFO projects that he's working on with now. So it's kind of interesting because it not only shows that they had communicated, but that apparently there was confirmation of receipt for a meeting that Neil McCasland's, he goes by Neil, apparently according to his Facebook page. This information has come to light thanks to our friend Alejandro Rojas at Open Minds. It seems that Neil's wife had confirmed receipt of an invitation for a meeting, and that it suggests strongly that Tom DeLonge and Major General Neil McCasland, or William Neil McCasland, his wife, and John Podesta went to Washington and met together to discuss UFOs. So we haven't got direct evidence of UFOs from the WikiLeaks, but from the latest batch, we have certainly gotten, I think, a clearer idea of who in government is interested. And we do know that there is a high-ranking scientist with the U.S. Air Force, and then also the head of Clinton's campaign, who all note, by the way, guys, wrote the foreword for Leslie Kane's book, UFOs, Government, was it Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record? So, yeah.
Cool.
I've got to let you know another little funny thing about me. I actually met Blink-182. I met Tom on my base in Greece. Just throwing that out there.
Did you meet him as a groupie or just a regular person?
No, I didn't even know who they were. I had no idea who they were at the time. So it's just sort of funny that it's another little connection with the ufology world.
Well, what was he doing there, though?
I don't know.
Inquiring minds want to know, and when I say that, I mean Kevin and I.
I don't know. I don't know. Not me.
Paint the picture, Tiffany. Paint it.
Wasn't me.
The 411.
Well, he was just on base, and I think they were passing through for sure. But it was an interesting encounter. I really didn't even know who they were, and just came up and started talking. That's it. That's all I know. Then they got on their plane and left.
All right. Before I jump off here, I've got to ask Micah, ask him to share with us his other passion, because tonight I'm hanging out with some brothers and sisters, music gigs, a band that I'm close with. To me, music is the universal language. And Micah, you are a musician. Share with us what music is all about with you.
That's a really good question right there, Kevin. Yeah. I agree. Music is a universal language. What's really fascinating is if you get on YouTube and you watch like a rock concert with an American band, but they're in Japan or anywhere else in the world, and it's fascinating when you see the way that music does just bridge the gap between cultures, and it bridges the gap between languages. It's just a fascinating idea to me. I mean, in certain science fictions even kind of suggested that what if aliens came to Earth and the communication form that they share with us is music? Because rather than to try and communicate a technological concept or something. What if they just want to come down here and just say, let's just share some really kind of a meaningful and wonderful experience together? Anyone who's been to a really great show, if you really, I mean, come on, does anybody not like music? I don't know anybody. I've never met a single human being I've ever known who didn't like music. You go to a show and you see a great group of performers, and it induces an altered state of consciousness. So yeah, Kevin, I do love music. I am a musician. I unfortunately play a lot of fairly repetitive bluegrass and country and stuff like that because I do music for a living, but I'm hoping to record an album this winter that's more the kind of artistic side of stuff because, yeah, I agree. I think that with good music, when it's well produced and well performed, sometimes you can convey senses and ideas and feelings and emotions that really language can't articulate.
There you go.
I think Kevin wants to talk about his favorite band tonight.
Yeah,
I have to. This is a shout out. You listen to our intro, the music, and Micah, your voice, which we appreciate you lending to us. It's Velvet Saints. That's who I'm here listening to. It's more of a techno electronica sound. But yeah, music. I mean, when I'm ready to tune out the world or my ex-wife, I turn to music.
Well, you know what? We could probably go into some of your favorite questions, Kevin.
Questions.
Do you want to do that now since you're here?
Round of shots? You mean you want to do the round of shots?
Yeah.
All right.
Do you want to?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So you do the first one.
All right, Micah, this is our little part of the show where it's a quick Q&A type thing. We call it Round of Shots, obviously a take on the Shooting from the Lip name. By the way, did you get your shirt?
I did, and thank you for that, by the way.
He hasn't showed off his shirt for us, right?
Oh,
no.
I will.
So Bullshit. I'm calling bullshit here.
Just call it.
Yeah. All right, sexy Micah, you gotta do that for us. That would mean a lot to us. All right, Round of Shots. First question. Staying with music, what was the first concert you attended?
Mine was the Wallflowers. Jacob Dylan, son of Bob Dylan, here in Asheville.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I was about 16 years old, and it was loud as hell. I didn't think that band would be that loud.
One Headlight is one of my. It's always that's a cool tune. What's the other one? There was One Headlight and the other song. It was
off that album. They had that song called "The Difference." They had a couple of tunes, but Sixth Avenue was it Sixth Avenue Heartache? Is that what they call it?
Exactly. That was it. That's it. That's the one. That's a great.
There were a lot of good songs on that album. Yeah, so I got to see him perform those live when I was 16. It was pretty cool.
You were just a baby. Okay, so the second one is, if you could have anyone locked in a room so that you could torment them for a day, who would you choose and how would you torment them?
This question's for me?
Yes, you can't say Kevin either.
Well, can I say you?
You could, but you'd have to tell why. You'd have to tell why.
Yeah.
No, I'll well, let's see here. Let me think. If I could lock anyone in a room and torment them, I have to be honest.
You'd have to be blasting horrible music all day and night, or talking my ear off, right? With politics.
Well,
no, tell me how you do it.
Let's see. Well, if it was you, I would lock you in a room and I would actually blast you all day with online lectures from Michael Shermer and from other prominent members of the skeptic community. And,
there you go.
Yeah, but if it was anybody else other than you, Tiff, what I would do is I would take my co-host of Middle Theory, the podcast I do on politics, I would lock him in a room. And I would make him listen to, I don't know, I'd have to come up with some really annoying music or something like that and punish him for not doing enough show prep. So
you could put me in there too. And I do apologize, but I do have a very sick child. She's got 105 fever as of last night. We're working it down, but she's still miserable. So I'm a little bit out there today because I've got one ear listening for the sick child.
Yeah. Well, good mommy.
Well, not very good considering I'm doing a show and listening to my child.
Let me digress for a little bit. Micah, you actually do a show on politics?
I do, yeah. I do a show called, in addition to the Gralien Report, which is my primary program, I do a show called Middle Theory, which is a centrist perspective on politics. It really came, it came about a few years ago as a result of somebody basically suggesting to me. It was Dick Oakley, a friend of mine, who is my co-host on the Gralien Report, Matt Oakley, who has been doing shows with me off and on for a number of years. Matt's dad, Dick, is the voice of the Gralien Report, and he had said years ago when we started doing that show, he says, Micah, what would be really great is if you could do a show that was, really, truly centrist, right down the middle of politics, but nobody can do that. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, yeah, he's right. Yeah, we
like
really
a challenge.
So I decided to try that. I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. And my co-host, Christopher McCullum, a.k.a. McNonymous, is what he goes by on the show. He actually said, let's call it middle theory. He came up with that because he was studying law at New York University. And he had said there's this thing called the middle range theory, which was, again, a term that comes from jurisprudence, but we kind of borrowed that term, the middle range theory, and just called the podcast Middle Theory, which was perfect for a centrist kind of minded podcast. And generally people get us, but it's kind of funny because if you get people who are really, really polarized politically, it's funny because inevitably if they don't like something they hear us say, then they perceive that we are politically opposite of them, which in fact it's intended to be a show that's more right down the middle. So, but in a year like this, as you guys can imagine, it's been quite weird doing a political show. So yeah, that's the other side of me, Kevin.
It's cool because I do a Monday night podcast where we talk any and everything, and for the next couple of Mondays up until Election Tuesday, we are going the political route where we're inviting pro-Trump, pro-Hillary people, because my co-host on Monday night, who is a talker in himself, is against each one. So the notion is that whoever calls in, he's going to tell them why he's anti either one. And so we're hoping that goes over pretty well. So, all right, cool.
That should be interesting. I'll have to tune in.
Yeah, I may reach out to you. I think we might be on to something here. So, what are we? My turn, Tiffany. Let's see. All right, Micah, what is your favorite phone app?
My favorite phone app. Let me think. This one's pretty blasé, but probably Twitter, because even though I do not like the character limit on Twitter, I do find that Twitter puts me in touch with a lot of people, and I, being a writer, do like being able to articulate things, through writing. And I think that, frankly, that for a lot of people, especially outside of maybe our generation, I don't think that people understand the full power of a communication platform like Twitter. But I would have to say that Twitter is rivaled, and it's really neck and neck between Twitter and Instagram. I recently finally got on Instagram, and kind of like you were saying that music is a universal language, the picture can say often words can't. Yeah. So I love Instagram too. I really have to say they're both kind of great.
Well, with that said, I'm going to call Micah out because we've been following him on Twitter, and he's not followed us back, Tiffany. So I don't know what the hell's on here.
Well, we got to fix it right now.
Yeah, right now. Right now. All right, Tiffany, go.
All right. So, okay, the next round of shots will be, and this one's specifically for you. If you could get into a time machine and go anywhere on Earth at any time in the past or future with a specific person, where, when, who?
I don't know how I can even answer that question.
And why?
It's almost impossible.
Machine, Micah. Yeah, it's your time machine. Go anywhere. Our budget allows you to go anywhere you want.
It's almost impossible to answer that.
We pay for the best on Blog Talk Radio.
Exactly.
Yeah, you guys do a great job. Yeah, it's almost impossible to answer that question because when I travel, one of the things that I love about traveling is the different people who I meet, and for me, traveling is not just when I travel, I do travel by myself often, but inevitably when I go places,
wait a minute, the doctor never travels alone.
Well, see, that's the thing is sometimes, yeah, wait, what are you implying there, actually? Hold on.
What are you?
Yeah, I can't escape that.
Come on.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, in truth, the very first thing that comes to mind, and this is no joke, I don't know why we'd want to go there. Why would we go to Pompeii? But yeah, I was going to say I'd take Tiffany Mack to Pompeii, but why would we really want to go there? I mean,
Just
to
go
watch
to Santorini. Go to ancient Akrotiri on Santorini. Much better place.
I was going to say, Tiff, we could go to Santorini, but what happens in Santorini at the most pivotal point in its history? I mean, do we really want to be there any more than we want to be on Pompeii? So
Pompeii actually blew the heck up anyway. You know, they both did, but they both had extravagant, beautiful mythologies, culture, history, just architecture, beautiful.
Well, yeah, the Cretan colonies there on Santorini Island, I mean, were some of the most advanced in the ancient world. I mean, prior to 3500 BC. Now, granted, they were already in decline leading up to the famous explosion there. But prior to that, I mean, these were some of the most advanced architecturally. And, I mean, their sewage systems, you know, the plumbing and the irrigation.
They had flushing toilets. Yes, they had toilets.
They did.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, really, yeah. That's one of the reasons I would want to go there. So I would maintain that prior to the explosion, I would like to, yeah. And since you know that area and you can speak the language, you would be the perfect companion. So come along. It's you and me. We're getting in the TARDIS right now, and we're going to go
to the TARDIS.
We're going to visit the ancient Santorini Island prior to the explosion of 3500 BC. That's where I would want to go because, of course, I'm the doctor. So.
Well, and, you know, the idea of, you know, Atlantis possibly being there. You know, it's one of the areas. Akrotiri claims to be part of the Atlantean society.
Yeah. That as a matter of fact, more modern scholars probably hold that the legend of Atlantis stems from the explosion at Santorini and the destruction of an island out there with advanced technology. The scholars maintain that probably they were talking about Santorini. I don't really buy that, frankly. The reason why is because, I mean, there's so many different interpretations among scholars, and, I mean, there are any number of instances where they may have been right or wrong, but with regard to Santorini Island being the Atlantis of myth, and you know, again, my friends in the academic communities, we've talked about Atlantis. I've never been particularly interested in Atlantis, but it certainly comes up from time to time. I've got a friend who's a geologist, Randall Carlson, who definitely thinks that there was a physical Atlantis at some point. Then I've got friends who, I guess, by virtue of being academicians, I can't or shouldn't mention their names right now, but I can tell you what they think. They don't think that the Critias document by Plato is a actual recollection of a place that existed. They see that as a thought experiment, kind of like the one that you guys are putting. Like, for instance, if this conversation were recorded and at some point in the future, a fragment of the written version of this conversation appears and someone reads in the future, Kevin and Tiffany asking me about a time machine and being able to travel back in time, would a future generation say, my God, these ancient people actually had time travel? Well, no, I mean, it was a thought experiment. And so some of my scholarly friends suggest that what we see in the Critias document, which explicitly references that civilization that existed the sum of years was 9,000, you know, before today or whatever, as it's described, and they talk about Atlantis and the technologies that they had. It has been expressed by some in scholarly circles and some of my friends in the academic community that that it is a thought experiment itself, and that there's no actual recollection of an ancient civilization being described there. But, you know, again, I tell you that just to kind of show that, I mean, on different sides of the fence, there are people who look at it both ways. And the bottom line is we don't seem to have any kind of a clear idea of whether there was an Atlantis, let alone what it was, if it existed.
All right. So another question. What is the strangest thing that you have ever eaten, and where were you, and why did you eat it?
If there's a name associated with that, other than a food,
let us know what her name is.
What her name? I was trying to beat around that, but Tiffany, you went straight there.
I know. Yeah, and did you? Okay, continue. Sorry.
Hold on a second. I've got to give a quick shout out to you, Micah and Tiffany, for doing the show. I'm actually just got text the Velvet Saints took a break and they gave our podcast a shout out, and I'm not even there to acknowledge.
Oh.
Good
So
one, Kevin.
I'm going to jump back in. Micah, much love to you for taking the time for us. Tiffany, you killed it tonight. Micah, I'll be in touch because I'd like to get you on our Monday night show to talk non-paranormal stuff. So.
Hey,
Micah, I want to hear you. Micah, no. Don't respond until you say, hail, yeah.
Hail, yeah.
Hail, yes.
There you go.
All right, guys.
Hear your voice, man.
Thanks.
Good to talk to you, buddy.
Yeah,
Love
take
you,
care.
Kevin.
Good night. Love you too, Steph. Good night.
Okay, so now, what was the strangest thing you've ever eaten, and who are you with, and why?
Well, let's see here. These are surprisingly difficult questions. I'm trying to think because, I'm a foodie, and so I eat a lot of weird things. But in terms of the weirdest thing that I've ever eaten, it's funny because a lot of people can just name just right off. I mean, they just know exactly what. I keep thinking of some sort of a bizarre raw thing I've had, or maybe something. I think my problem is that I eat so much because somebody who's like a real country type, meat and potatoes. I just eat. I got to have bread with every meal, and give me some sort of meat and some sort of vegetables. It's weird for them if they say they've had sea urchin, or it's weird for them.
That's what I said last week. That's very funny that you even mentioned that.
Well, but see, that's something I've had, and I wouldn't consider that necessarily the weirdest thing I've ever eaten, because I eat a lot of weird things. And
okay, so, did you have anything on your Ancient Aliens cruise that was super interesting?
You'd think so. When I was traveling, I went all throughout different parts of, I was in Mexico, I was in the Yucatan.
That's all there, yeah. Nothing there?
No, see, typically, for instance, when I was in Belize, we were there on the day of their Belizean Independence Day, and they were serving chicken with beans and rice, and beans and rice is traditionally what they eat in Belize on Sundays. That's their kind of their Sunday meal, but they served it to us, I guess, on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, whatever day it was that we were there. It was delicious. It was really, really good, but yeah, it was a very kind of a simple meal. I'm trying to think of something really, really far out and bizarre that I've eaten. I've never eaten the live octopus like they do in, South Korea, things like that. And I don't think that I would probably want to do that. Gosh, I don't know. It's strange. That's just one of those questions where I think what I'm trying to say here is that I eat enough strange things that I can't think of a single meal I've ever had or a single dish or a bite of anything I've had that was so weird that it really stuck out. I'm trying to think of
So you're not like Andrew Zimmern, is what we're getting at.
Well, I think in a sense, actually, I'm saying I am more like him. I eat a lot of weird things, and so therefore it really kind of diminishes the weirdness for me. I don't perceive. There are a lot of things that I could say that I've eaten that people like. Maybe I could give you an example of some weird things I've had that that other people might find weird, but that I wouldn't find weird. Again, sea urchin is one of those kind of things. Gosh, what else? I'm trying to think of exotic vegetables and things. Here's something that was kind of weird. I was down there in Belize recently. I was handed leaves out in the middle of in the jungle, and I began chewing on these leaves because they had told me that they were a spice, and it turns out it was all spice. But I don't know if that's so much a weird thing as it was just kind of an interesting thing because they're in the jungle being able to chew on this. You think allspice is by virtue of the name allspice, like a mixture of different spices and stuff. It's an actual leaf, and you can taste it. It tastes like the allspice that you'd buy in the grocery store, but it's a leaf, and it's got that natural cut. There's a burn to it. There's a burn to it. And so I'm standing there in the middle of the Belizean jungle chewing on this leaf, and then it dawns on me that there could be, a microbial contagion.
No.
Yeah, because again, what they warn you about is if you eat salads and things in any country that you go to, typically, water is susceptible, and also plant vegetation. If you consume something and you are not used to the microbes in that area, you can become violently ill for a number of days as your body is becoming used to the microbial content in the water or the food or whatever and everything. And so here I am standing there in the middle of the jungle with thunder rolling, and it's about to start raining, and I'm chewing allspice, and I realize, oh my God, I could actually get sick from chewing this. So I spit it out. I didn't get sick at all. I ate a lot of interesting things while I was down there. My secret, though, and this I will tell you, my secret when I'm traveling in Mexico or in other countries, or even parts of Europe from time to time, my secret is if you're unsure about the quality of the water or whatever where you're traveling, always drink beer. Always drink beer. That is the safest way to. But you'd have to know that because you've traveled as much or more than I have.